Hey everybody, welcome to Live with Kevin. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, learning with one of my favorite people, Cindy Pascale. Cindy and I have known each other for a long time. We've done business together. We've created some learning opportunities together, and I'm happy to introduce her and for us to talk about learning today, learning in organizations, and what's the future of learning in organizations. So let me tell you a little bit about Cindy. Cindy is the CEO and co-founder of Vado, which is an award-winning, off-the-shelf e-learning courseware provider. They've created a whole range of courses from sales and compliance and sexual harassment to employee business skills and my favorite, management and leadership skills and leadership development. And she got 16 plus years of HR training and development and OD leadership experience. And she's been running training, talent management, and assessment companies for 12 years at least. She's been a judge on some big award situations for a company called Human Capital Media for 3 years. She's been a learning elite judge, and she's been a contributing author to e-learning industry since 2018. And so, Cindy, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for that awesome introduction.
All the way from Minneapolis.
Yeah.
What I learned earlier today, everybody, is that Cindy's husband is a fan of mine. So now I know I have at least one fan in the world, and I helped Cindy have a good day because her husband's impressed that she's here. So listen, we are really here today to talk about, as promised, what learning will look like in your organization or in organizations in the coming months, years, et cetera. And I know because of your work, Cindy, you spend a lot of time thinking about that. So in the big picture, what are your thoughts about that? Like, how is it going to look different in the future? We'll get to the whole COVID part in a minute, but just in general, what do you see as the trends? What do we need to be aware of? What should we be thinking about?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, training, learning and development has slowly been evolving over the years, from instructor-led workshops to more and more of that training being done online. And companies, cite different reasons for that transition. This is pre-COVID. It costs less, learning retention is better, it's more flexible for learners. You get some consistency, people can go back and review, so a lot of good reasons for that transition from instructor-led to e-learning.
So, okay. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, put on my black hat for a second. So everyone in the world right now is talking about how we ought to be going to school, sending our kids to school. And I mean, we may not be saying we ought to be. I mean, I'm not talking about the COVID part, but there is lots of concern that the quality of the learning, the quality of the education will be compromised. Certainly will be changed, but will be compromised by doing it all virtually. Now, you're talking about e-learning and not sort of virtual instructor-led. But talk to us about that, because you just said something that some might take issue with. And you said retention is up and that sort of thing. So talk a little bit about that, if you would. Sure.
I mean, I think what you're asking is, how do you figure out what can be done in a virtual or an online situation versus what needs to be done in person, face to face? And that is a really big question that organizations need to figure out. I mean, there was one author in Forbes magazine in May of this year who said, and I'm going to quote him, "Education and training that can be done online will be done online always from this point forward." I mean, that's a really, really big prediction, very bold prediction about just that need to go from face-to-face, instructor-led to online. And quite frankly, I think the part of the quote that is a little bit of a backdoor is that if it can be done online.
And not everyone's going to agree with that, right? Every organization is going to be different in that regard. How do we make that decision, right? So, well, before we do that, let me just make a comment. I mean, in the last 2 days, we've had two major universities changed their mind from having everyone come to class to not come to class, right? So there's this whole thing about can they or will we? And I know I'm conflating the university setting with the organizational setting, but I think there's some things to consider there. The reality is that we've let this cat out of the bag. So if you were in the camp of everything should be face to face, the article is clear and I think accurate that we're not going to be back there 100% ever again. Kevin will probably get on fewer airplanes than he used to. I do think I'll get on airplanes again, but it will be less, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we make that decision in our organizations about what we could or should go to some sort of online or digital or e-learning or whatever other sort of platforms we might consider?
Yeah, I think you really have to look at what you're trying to teach, and does that need to be in person? Just think about, okay, you talked about universities. Do you want your doctor to only have been taught online, or do you want that person to actually have some, actual experience working in a lab and, before they're, I mean, I know
scalpel in hand, right?
Right.
Hey, you're going to be my first one. I'm looking forward to this surgery. I don't think that's what I want.
No, for sure. And so that's a kind of a dramatic example, but it certainly applies to all the different topics that a company is going to need to train their employees on. And sure, you can videotape someone operating a machine, and hopefully, by watching a video, the person can say, okay, I know what, these are 4 steps, but you got to be very careful about what you can put online.
Well, and I think I think you raise an interesting point, because I'm a big fan, and long before e-learning and the way we think about it today, and long before we met and we worked together, I've always been a big fan of the ability to watch someone else. The demonstration is valuable, but it's limited, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's valuable and limited. There's only if I was going to be the surgeon, no one wants that. But if I was going to be the surgeon, before I cut the first time, even if it's on a cadaver, I want to watch someone else as a part of the learning. And that's what I think you're saying is, how do we put together the whole package of how we make learning happen? Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep.
So
talking about is like a blended learning environment where you're doing both.
So, okay. So we said it earlier, but here's the real question. So you've been thinking about this for a long time, and the trends that you described, we could have had this conversation in February, January, last November, and everything you've said so far would have been true. I mean, we wouldn't have had that conversation about the colleges, but everything else we said would have been true. How has COVID changed these trends for organizations? Like, what have you seen? What are you hearing from organizations, from your clients in the time, since the middle of March?
Sure. Well, there's one big thing in terms of the rush to work from home. You think about, here in the United States, that happened in mid-March. People just went home and worked from home, and it really was a rush. And so much of a rush that maybe companies weren't real organized about what they were having people do working from home. And so they had their employees and their managers take online courses. You got some compliance courses that need to be done. Okay, do that while we're figuring this out. You also have people that they're like, okay, I don't have a whole lot to do, but I'm going to take some courses. I always wanted to take a course on Excel or whatever the topic is. I want to be a better communicator. We saw e-learning usage go up 2.5 to 3 times over in the March and April timeframe. Huge consumption of online learning. So that's one thing that changed because of COVID.
So what's happened? So on that point, before you go on, what's happened since then? So if there was the big bump, March and April, where are we now? So if you take, July, which you probably have some data for, July versus last July.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? Are we still above? What's going on?
Usage is higher, but it's not the spike that we saw March and April. I think we've established a new kind of normal on online courseware consumption. And part of that is you have social distancing requirements. Even if you're back at work, you're not getting a group of people together in a conference room, 20, 30 people. They're, so companies have started to pivot how they deliver training. So more of it is online. And, you have employees that are, I think there's going to be a reluctance to go into a conference room with your 20 other coworkers to have training. People want to maintain that social distance. We also are seeing more people that have not returned to work yet. They're, 25 to 30% is the forecast, even like a year from now, that just simply won't go back to the office full time. They might go in every other day or something like that, but they've proven to their leaders that they can work successfully from home. And so they're being allowed to continue to work from home.
Yeah, I actually think that number, I mean, I know that that's what a lot of people are saying, 25 to 30, but I think when you include the people that are going to do some of each, some in the office and some not, I think the number will be higher than that. I think, we're live right now, and I'm saying that a year from now, that number will be higher than 30%. If you count all the people that are going in some of the time, but not all the time. It's going to be significant. I think you're exactly right. For those of you that are here with us live, obviously many of you are going to be watching this later, but if you're with us live and you've got a question or a comment, something you want Cindy to talk about or you want to ask her about, please just put that in the comments. We'll see them and I will share your questions with Cindy. So I interrupted you. We talked about the spike, but what else are you seeing in terms of trends with COVID?
Yeah. So more of a pivot to online learning. We saw the spike in learning consumption. We've seen that kind of level off at a level higher than it was this time last year.
Mm-hmm.
We're also seeing more people look at, and companies wanting to train their employees and their managers on how to work remotely. So how to be successful working from home, how to be a good remote leader.
A topic near and dear to my heart, Cindy. You can see above Cindy's head, you see a little picture of the Long Distance Teammate. It's the new book that Wayne Trammell and I have written. It's officially coming out in January. You're going to hear a lot more about it from us between now and then. But yeah, the Long Distance Teammate. And we're working on some new stuff with Cindy's organization that'll be available hopefully about the same time the book comes out. We'll figure all that out as we go. So one of the things that you've in your work that you have talked about a lot. It's research that's been around for a long time, but I'm guessing that not everyone who's listening will know these three numbers and what these numbers mean. I didn't tell you I was going to ask about this, but can you talk about 70, 20, 10? Now, if you've got people here who are in learning and development, okay, they probably know. But if you're a leader in an organization or you're just a member of a team in an organization, you may never have heard these numbers, and they're important numbers. They're useful numbers. So, Cindy, can you talk about those just for a couple minutes?
Absolutely. So 70-20-10 is built around a big body of research that was done about how people learn. And the results are 70-20-10. You learn 70% of what you learn is by doing. 20% is through mentoring and coaching. 10% is through formal training. And if you think about those numbers, it's going to feel rather intuitive. We all grew up with parents, teachers, coaches telling us practice. So practice playing the piano, practice taking the shot if you're a basketball or hockey player or whatever, practice taking the shot, practice your spelling words. I heard that a lot. And
Did it work? Did it work, Cindy?
Well, now there's spell check. So
the need to spell is kind of going away like cursive writing, I suppose, right?
Yeah. So practice makes perfect. And so we grew up with that messaging around practice, practice, practice. And if you think about the workplace, it makes sense too. To develop key competencies and skills, you need to practice. You need to do it. And you need to do it again, and you need to do it again. And as you're doing it again, hopefully you're taking some time to really think about, okay, that went really well, except for this one thing, and I'm going to, do something a little bit different next time. So it's the fundamental of how you go from being maybe average to good to really, really good at any skill or competency. I don't think anyone is ever really good at giving someone corrective feedback, and and you got to practice that to become good and have that person that you're talking to about corrective feedback say, you know what, thank you for taking the time to bring that to my attention.
Right. Absolutely. So 70-20-10. And so we were really having a conversation in some ways in this conversation about the 10, about how do we do the 10. And so when Cindy says formal, that doesn't necessarily mean classroom, workshop, conference, although it could.
Mm-hmm.
It really means everything in the whole realm that we've been talking about here. And so I think it was useful. I'm glad you shared that because it puts the whole thing back into context. And I think that that's useful, especially for leaders who might be here, because we often think, well, they need something, so we'll go send them to training. Whether send them, used to be send them to was send them off to a classroom. And now it might be send them to the e-learning,
Mm-hmm.
send them to the LMS, whatever. But it's still about the sending, right? And I think it's important because that 20, Mr. and Miss Leader, that's you, ought to be more of you. And then of course there's all the rest. So I have some questions that I thought Cindy might be useful. And for all of you who are watching, she doesn't know I'm going to ask her these. So one of them is, okay, so these trends are happening and maybe COVID has sped some of them up. And everyone who's watching us is probably might be wearing multiple hats. So I want to ask sort of the same question with multiple hats on. First hat is, okay, I work in an organization, whatever my job is, leader, individual contributor, but like I'm a worker, right? What's your advice to me as an engaged employee who wants to be better? When you think about these trends around learning, what should I as a learner be doing or maybe doing differently now or in the future?
Well, I would say continue to proactively develop your skills. And if you're an engaged employee who wants to get better, you probably understand some of the things that you might want to get better at. You've maybe done a little self-assessment, or in your last performance review, your leader might have said, you need to develop these kind of skills. Proactively go to your LMS and find courses on those topics. Proactively go to your leader and say, I'm looking for some specific feedback on whatever that topic is. I'm really working on it. And continue to use your time to, instead of binge watch Netflix, okay, I'm guilty of that. Use that to develop your skills and capabilities.
So I actually love that. I specifically love the point of decide what you want to be learning, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer, Cindy, in the learning goal. And here's the area I'm going to focus on for the year, for the quarter, for the month, however you want to look at that. So I think that's super good advice. So now I'm asking the same question with the leader hat on. So now you're talking to people who are leading others. What advice do you have for them to help them help their teams be more effective learners in the world today?
Well, your role as a leader is probably twofold. One is work with your employees on a development plan. Have a plan that the employee can work during the year. And then the second is that mentoring and coaching. Kevin, you already said it. That's your job, and part of your job as a leader is to help develop your employees, give them that coaching and that feedback.
Okay, so now if I'm a senior leader, or if I'm in the learning and development department or the training group or whatever it's called in your organization, and you're thinking about how are we going to do all this differently moving forward? How are we going to make all this learning happen that still needs to happen? We can't do it the way we used to do it. What advice do you have for people organizationally? You've sort of given us a picture of where we're headed, but what advice would you have for people right now to get better at, or to be thinking about this and taking action on all this right now?
Okay, so as a senior leader, you kind of have the responsibility for setting the vision and the strategy around how we're going to develop our employees. And what are we going to develop them on? So you probably have defined some competencies and set the budget and make sure that there are resources available for people to access, whether that's online learning or some blended learning or virtual events or whatever the budget would dictate to fit into your strategy to develop the skills and capabilities that you need to have your employees.
Okay. Well, there's one thing that you didn't say, Cindy, that people need to know, and that they need to go there. So this is, we've been talking with Cindy, who is the CEO and co-founder of Vado. This is the website. So Cindy, if people go here, what will they find? And I know you've got something special for them if they go here as well. So talk a little bit about that, and maybe say just a little bit more about the organization.
So Vado's an off-the-shelf e-learning courseware provider. Kevin mentioned some of the topics. We have over 450 titles in our catalog. On our website, you can download the catalog. There on the resources tab, there's a paper that I wrote called L&D's New Normal, Prepare Now. You can download that. So you can see the rest of whatever. There are a lot of things that we didn't talk about today.
Yeah, and in fact, it is that white paper that led me to say, hey, Cindy, why don't we jump on and do this live? And so you're going to want to get that. Go to vadoinc.net, go to the resources tab, because not only will it summarize some of the things that we talked about here, it goes into a lot of other things as well, and you'll want to do that. I hope you'll do that.
I'll mention one more tab on our website. There's a tab called 70-20-10. So if you want to learn more about that body of research and really maybe how you can adopt it inside your organization, there's a lot of resources. There's paper, videos, different things.
And the reason that I brought it up for those of you that are listening, and if you're just getting here now, you're going to go back and listen. The reason that I shared that is, again, in the learning and development community, most people are at least aware of 70-20-10. In the world of leaders everywhere else, most aren't. And so I wanted to make sure we talked about that a little bit, because I think it's super important and super valuable. And so it's worth, I think, you dipping into that as a leader a little bit more. If you follow me, if you're sort of here and as a leader, chances are that will be useful to you, and I encourage you to take a look. And it might be the way for you to start to help influence in the organization as well. So I encourage you to do that. So before we go, I want to let everybody know, because Cindy, you mentioned there's a variety of ways moving forward organizationally how we might do learning. Certainly e-learning is a part of that. Certainly virtual stuff is a part of that. And speaking of virtual events, September 14th through 18th, we have created and we are hosting a live 5-day long event, Virtual LeaderCon. So you're going to want to go to virtualleadercon.com to learn more about that event. And if you like learning from world-class experts in a video mode, in a live video mode, and if you're here with us live, I know that you do, or you wouldn't be here. But Virtual LeaderCon is going to be amazing. We are super excited. We're still putting together putting all the finishing touches on it. But if you go to virtualleadercon.com, you can learn more. Most importantly, you can go there and you can get signed up and registered for free. And if you're thinking about this organizationally, a pretty good way to help your leaders get some really practical and relevant help from true thought leaders around the world. And we're going to do that starting on September the 14th, virtualleadercon.com. So Cindy, any final thoughts before we go?
I guess you kind of put me on the spot there. That was a really tough question.
I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for everyone who is attending.
And I'm going to just encourage all of you again, go to vadoinc.net to take advantage of some of those free resources. And Cindy, thanks again for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. And for those of you that are noticing that Kevin's not been live for a while, that's all changing. We're coming back on a much more frequent basis. Be watching for us on whatever channel you're watching us on at 12:05 Eastern Time, right afternoon. We'll be coming back more frequently. And in fact, next time I'll be back will be on Friday. It'll just be me. I'm going to talk about some pretty interesting stuff about what you ought to be doing as a remote leader right now. That's what we'll do Friday. Thanks again, Cindy, for being here. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Until the next time, be well and be remarkable.
Thank you.